folks, welcome to the Riff with Jeza podcast. I want to talk today about a follow-on from the episode the other day where I was talking about like the importance of like sort of establishing the truth, like being honest with what's happening and seeing things as it is. I want to so often people will go to extremes with everything. It's just kind of how humans are. So I want to kind of go to the flip side of this, because this is kind of more of a resonance thing. It's not an all or nothing thing. And so something I noticed during COVID. So basically during COVID, you know, a lot of us were sort of called it as a scam. We were a little bit angry at the government. And, you know, like, but basically, you know, a lot of the stuff that happened was bullshit. And a lot of these groups kind of, you know, were quite negative and were generating emotions within themselves. And so what I found, and it's a lot of self-righteousness with this stuff, a lot of negative emotion. And what I found with this stuff, so as a leaf blower, damn it, hopefully you'll be out here okay. What I found with this stuff was that over time, I started to have negative events happen, you know, because of my attitude and emotions that were caught up with the government. It's almost like it was feeding off my own negativity, and it kind of would bring on these situations. And yeah, so for a couple of years, I had stuff happen, you know, that was quite, sorry, it's not great. For a couple of years, stuff would happen to me, you know, get ripped off or some negative event. So just hang on. And I felt it was because I had too much focus on, you know, the negative stuff with the government. And so, you know, there's almost a little bit of paranoia that sort of started to set in. And so this is kind of the distinction, and this is all about balance. So the issue with this stuff is not to sort of pretend the government isn't doing what they're doing, or not to pretend reality isn't how it is, but it's whatever. But if you generate emotion from that, then that's when it becomes problematic. So if you're creating emotion, a negative vibration from all that talk about, then it becomes a problem. That's completely different to just sort of accepting, okay, this is what they're doing, you know, and sort of letting it go. You know, it's funny, when I think I said this story on another podcast, but when I went to Melbourne on a flight and I didn't wear a mask, and nobody asked me to put a mask on, because at that moment I'd kind of made peace with it. But for much of that COVID period, you know, I wasn't at peace with what was happening. And it's understandable at one level, but then you don't want to be fueling that negativity, and this is where it becomes dangerous. So for a couple of years, all the decisions I made from that kind of negative period, a lot of the decisions end up being problematic. You know, you get ripped off, or there'd be some conflict or whatever. And it took me a couple of years to actually kind of let go of that stuff. And so I stopped kind of generating, you know, negative outcomes for myself. And so again, there's nothing in me that's so saying that, like, I still think what I think, but it's just a case of, like, you know, it's not a case of whether it's true or not. It's a case of, like, how much energy are you putting into that negativity stuff. So you can end up creating negative events for yourself with your thought bubbles and your vibrations. It's quite interesting. So what I talked about the other day about the truth is what matters, that is really true, but you don't want to sort of swing to like a negativity vibration, particularly when it's a self-indulgent thing. And the key thing is to recognize when it's just a self-indulgent thing. You know, I remember back in the day, I used to follow politics a bit, and whenever I'd complain about our Prime Minister, the phone would hang up. It was almost like it would happen like automatically, because I'd generate a negative emotion and something would just happen. It was quite incredible. So I wanted to sort of balance this out, because you can see a situation for what it is, but when you start to indulge, then you start to create negative outcomes. And as I said, like, you know, there are still things that happen from that period where, yeah, like my negativity was creating a negative outcome. But I want to mention something as well, just before I finish off here. I don't have a lot of time today. But the other thing I want to mention from this is that if you find yourself stuck in a negative situation, and which can be completely related to the vibration you're putting out, a way that you can sort of undo that to a degree is, as much as you can, appreciating what you can in the situation. Now, the chances are in the situation you'll feel like there's nothing to appreciate, but what you can do is just make a decision that there's always something to appreciate if you decide to. And there's always something true that you can appreciate about it. You know, so I'm thankful I'm not that person anymore. I'm thankful I have a better understanding, you know, even though some bad things happen. So there's always something about it that you can learn from that will give you a higher perspective. But the trick is like making a decision to step back from the emotion and seeing what's positive about it. Not in a fake way, in a real way, like what actually is helpful in this situation. And then once you see what's helpful, your vibrations gradually starts to shift, and the problem is more likely to resolve, because when you're appreciative in the situation, problems can fall away more. Whereas when you're tight-fisted and angry and resentful and all this sort of stuff, then problems tend to stick. You know, they hang around, you know. What you resist persists. So if we just do a little exercise. So if you think about any issue you have at the moment, so just breathe in and think about it. Anything that's bothering you, and just ask yourself, is there something I can appreciate about this? Like something that's true, that you know to be true, and that you can in this situation. So what's good about it? And if you can't find anything, and if you can't find anything good about it, what could be good? You know, so as much as you can, find something. And so when you find something true to appreciate, the anger loosens. So the grip loosens. And when the grip loosens, solutions can arrive. And as I say, you're not trying to pretend the situation isn't as it is. The situation is as it is. But you're acknowledging there is some good in the situation. And, you know, this may take time, because if you've created negativity around something, then that will have a certain momentum. The first step, you could say, is just to be still with your thoughts. So to drop the complaining, or whatever the case may be. But then as much as possible, anything you can find that's helpful will free you of the situation. It's quite interesting. So you'll get freedom from finding something helpful in the situation. But you have to make a decision to be willing to see something in there. Now, you don't have to like the situation. You don't have to like it at all. But just being willing to see something that brought you benefit. And as I say, you may have to practice that a bit. But once you start to practice it, the situation will loosen and the problem will resolve. It's quite incredible. Now you can also do this with meditation. Joe Dispenza has a box meditation. It's the same idea, but what happens is that if you haven't loosened some of your grip with the emotion, it actually can be very hard to meditate if you haven't made some peace with it. Because if you're really rolled up, then it's very hard to meditate. So if you find what's good in the situation, and again, it doesn't mean you like the situation, but there has to be some good, then the grip of the situation starts to loosen. And then you're on track when you find something funny about it as well. What's funny about this? When you see the funny side, again, it loosens the grip. So humour is quite powerful in the way that it dilutes people's rigidity. So let me know how you go with that. And this is something I'm working on. I mean, I have found benefits I have learnt lessons from that period, and it has given me benefits. But there's sometimes little things here and there that I have to work on. That I still have a bit, a negative attitude with this, that, or the other. And as I say, it's not really, it's not to say it's not true, but you don't really want to spend time there if it's not useful, because the negativity just gets infused in you. Anyway, so I'll leave it there. And it's the focus is, what is good about this situation? What can I appreciate about it? And keep breathing as you do it, because the breathing helps dispel the emotion. And you really will see, and actually write it down as well, and you'll see that the situation is actually giving you something. And in fact, sometimes when it's a really strong emotion, there's a bigger opening for you. There's a bigger opportunity. But the key thing is, it does take willingness to step back and not be stubborn about your fixed views. Anyway, so I hope that helps. And see you in the next one.